GALP.
New year, new podcast episode. It's me, Bish. Welcome to GALP. Today, we're going to continue our Dynasty Warriors series where we kind of go through older Dynasty Warriors games and give you my opinions on them. I know we've done that many times before, but I wanted to get a better retrospective. Is that the word? I don't know. Anyway, wanted to get a better idea on the games and to kind of inform you guys about the history of Dynasty Warriors. And probably next month, I think we're going to be focusing more so on different titles. I think we're going to be focusing on the Yakuza series. I'm going to try my best to go through all of them from the original Yakuza up until Like a Dragon in anticipation for Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. So, before we get into that, I want to thank our sponsors, Crunchyroll and J-List. Yes, you heard that right. J-List is back and better than ever on the podcast. So there will be an updated ad. But if you want to support us, you can go to getlifepodcast.com/Crunchyroll, or you can go to getlifepodcast.com/J-List and use the code GAL, and that'll give you 5% off on everything in J-List. So awesome, isn't it? Okay, supports the show. So yeah, Dynasty Warriors 4 and 5. Last episode we spoke about Dynasty Warriors 2 and 3. I got some really lovely feedback from you guys in the TK family, as well as just the wider Muso community. So thank you very much for your support there, guys. Really do appreciate it. Shin Sangoku Muso 3, aka Dynasty Warriors 4, was released in 2003 in Japan and in the West. I believe it was February 27th in Japan, March 25th in North America, and June 27th in the PAL regions. Bear in mind, back then, Muso games and a lot of Japanese games on the PS2 era didn't get universal worldwide releases at the same time. I don't think we actually got that for Muso games until Dynasty Warriors 9, which is, you know, many years after that. But I think the main reason, at least back then, was because of localization. So I think Dynasty Warriors 4 got localized in multiple languages with dubs as well. So it wasn't just like subtitles. You got an English dub, you had a localization in French and in German dubs as well, obviously Japanese. I think you also got Spanish. Koei was supporting more with multiple languages back then. This was the first Koei game in Europe to be fully published by Koei. At least the first Muso game to be fully published by Koei, which it's a start of an era for Koei, right? Because before it was either EA, if it was with Samurai Warriors, and I think they relied on Midas Interactive as well as a company called THQ. Obviously, those companies no longer exist apart from EA, but back then it was just so difficult in terms of licensing. This was kind of Koei's first foray into like proper publishing in Europe. Obviously, they were publishing it in America themselves. And yeah, the game also kind of got re-released on the original Xbox later that year. So by September, it got a release in Japan and then a release in the PAL regions by November 2003. I didn't know it got a original Xbox release, but it's good that it did. It isn't available as backwards compatible on the Xbox series of consoles. Unfortunately, I think that would have been something amazing for Koei to have done. They didn't do that. It's also been released on the PlayStation Network in 2013 and now since has been removed. So if you don't live in Japan or in Asian countries, you won't find this on the PlayStation Network. And a lot of people are like, wait a minute, Bish, it was on the PlayStation Network last time I checked. I checked recently, it got removed from PlayStation Network. It was on there, and that's how I got Dynasty Warriors 5 on the PS3. It seems that Koei has removed Dynasty Warriors 3 and 5, as well as the other games that were on the network. So Orochi 1 and 2, as well as Kessen 3. They didn't have Kessen 2 because I believe Kessen 2 was published also by THQ, so they didn't have the rights to republish it. Koei kind of just removed them without warning. So I hope Koei brings it back, and I thought, well, maybe they did that because they were going to release a HD collection. And like I said, is this sort of mini-series a way to encourage Koei to do an HD collection? Maybe. I have no faith in Koei that they will do something like that because we've kind of been suggesting that for the last 10 years now, and nothing has happened. So I don't think we're going to get any sort of HD collection. I've said that last episode and I'll continue to say that. Koei, prove me wrong. Anyway, so Dynasty Warriors 4, an amazing game. It got a another release on the PC called Dynasty Warriors 4 Hyper. If you want to see any sort of comments on that, and I've never played Hyper, I didn't own a PC at the time. There's not much footage, and I think the only person that is actually doing proper footage of this PC version of the game is Chris Gildart. So go and check him out, join the guild, join his Discord, all of that fun stuff. His videos are quite good. So I'll put a link in the description so you can actually see the best footage that you can get from Dynasty Warriors 4, because it looked pretty good from his videos. Dynasty Warriors 4, then there was 4 Extreme Legends, which obviously included mixed drawing. I didn't get to experience that as a kid, so I'm not really going to mention it as such. I did get to play afterwards, later on in my life, maybe about a year ago. I did get to try the mixed joy, as well as got to play 4 Empires. So I will be talking about Empires in this game, and I will be talking about Extreme Legends as well. Shin Sangoku Musou 3 topped the sales charts in Japan, sold over 1 million copies within 9 days. That's very impressive. And it got a 78 out of 100 on Metacritic. I can't remember what the Famitsu score was, because I tend to sort of look at that. Especially with Musou games, the Metacritic scores don't really mean much, because it's a sort of an amalgamation from a lot of other aggregates and such. And some people tend to score Dynasty Warriors games very low. In this case, this game got like a 79 in game rankings, Metacritic of 78, of course. The PC version got a 65 for some reason. GameSpot gave it a 7.1. IGN, oddly enough, I don't know who was working at IGN at this time, because back in the day, Dynasty Warriors games got good reviews. Dynasty Warriors 4 got an 8.6. from IGN, which was really good. A lot of the people, from what I've seen, the old reviews kind of destroyed the old voices, which I thought was a bit odd, because this era was such a great improvement compared to Dynasty Warriors 3, that whole "you flaming idiots." And if you guys don't know what that sounds like, it sounds like this. You flaming idiots! Take this, you know. So the voice-over work in this game was a lot better. It used the same voice actors, and bear in mind, a lot of those voice actors were green, green voice actors. A lot of them were very young. They just started in the industry. This was probably one of their first titles, and I know that for a fact because a lot of the voice actors that were in Dynasty Warriors, and have remained in Dynasty Warriors games until 9 when they recasted everyone, but a lot of those voice actors got started because of Dynasty Warriors. That was like their first major title that they worked on, so they have a lot of love and respect for the title, and you can tell within their performances. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. They gave amazing performances. People that sort of slagged them off back then, it's like almost, well, look at them now. Like, you have Yuri Lowenthal, who's the voice of Spider-Man, and he's the voice in a lot of different anime. You have people like Lex Lang, who's the voice of Zhuge Liang, and I think back then, when we're talking about Dynasty Warriors 4 and 5, he was the voice of Sima Yi as well. Roger Craig Smith, who was the voice of Zhang Liao from like the very beginning. I'm trying to remember, there's so many different voice actors that are now like legends in the community. So, if we're talking about like Dynasty Warriors 8 and 7, you have people like Keiji Tang, who's the voice of Sima Zhao, who's now, in a lot of different anime and games, most notably Gojo Satoru from Jujutsu Kaisen. I really did like the voice acting in Dynasty Warriors 4. It kind of added to that atmosphere. There was a lot of emotion in it. The game itself was very emotional, very dark, and that's something that I do want to talk about. There is such a difference between Dynasty Warriors 4 and Dynasty Warriors 5, and there was only a 2-year difference in terms of release, which says a lot, because Dynasty Warriors 3 had some sort of vibrancy in the backgrounds and backdrops and stuff. Dynasty Warriors 4 kind of took that on a different level. And what do I mean by that? Dynasty Warriors 4 used more like muted tones, a lot of dark tones, and back then it was quite difficult, especially if you're a child. It was very difficult to sort of figure out brightening settings on a CRT, because this would have come out by the time that CRT televisions existed. HD televisions were kind of getting introduced, but most people have CRTs. I know for a fact that I had like a huge CRT back then, and that's how I used to play it. And it was like this old Sony CRT. I think it was like maybe 30 inches. It was huge for a CRT. Like, it was massive. Maybe like 27 inches, 30 inches. It was a huge CRT. And it had all of the connection inputs at the beginning. I'm smiling as I'm saying this because I'm remembering it now, because it had all of the inputs at the front. They also had additional inputs at the back. But for the PS2, it was just so much easier just to put them in the front. And remember SCART? A lot of people use SCART. I never liked using it. People tend to use it for like VCRs and stuff. I didn't like it. Anyway, so I used to plug in the inputs at the front, and playing Dynasty Warriors on a CRT was just amazing. I still have the inputs on I have like an LG 4K TV, but it still has composite and component cable inputs, so I could still play my PS2 without needing to do, you know, HDMI conversions and all that nonsense. So, and I can play it in the original screen. I don't mind. It's a larger screen, and it's a bit weird because Dynasty Warriors 2 and 3 almost looked a lot better on modern televisions than Dynasty Warriors 4, and I think probably that's because of its dark palette. Back then, like I said, it was very difficult to, especially as a child, to figure out, oh, I need to change my contrast settings, or I need to change my brightness and stuff. But now as I'm older, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. There was a lot of detail that I missed because my contrast was too high or my brightness was too low. So like a lot of stuff that I missed and it was too dark. But I almost missed that, if that makes sense, because playing it on modern televisions, it's not as good. And I'm talking about playing modern televisions on a PS2, not on a PS3. If you're playing it on PS3 using PlayStation 2 emulation, it's not that bad. But when you're playing it on a PS2, it's horrible. On a modern TV, I would recommend to play this game on a CRT. If you can still get a CRT, that is. Yeah, so besides the point, art style was quite gritty and like, I don't know how to explain it. It was very metal, if that makes sense. Like, metal in terms of like the music genre. I'm just looking at gameplay now. I'm gonna shout out to Chris Gildart, by the way. I'm watching his video now because I need to sort of refresh myself on like Dynasty Warriors 4's graphics and stuff. Assuming I didn't play it before, but I did play it. On PC it looks a lot better, but like back then I remember it was super dark and like dingy. It was a lot more muted colors. And you kind of saw that with, you know, even like the Muso bar and like the KO count. Right, the way that the KO count looked, it was very sort of, I don't know what the word is. It's like, I don't know. It kind of reminded me of like playing a game in hell almost. That's not a bad thing. It's just, it's kind of cool because it's like outlined in red and it's like glowing and you got the fire behind the characters and stuff like that. And you know, it just looked really cool. There's obviously a difference. If you want to see the difference between Hyper and the original Dynasty Warriors 4, Hyper does use slightly different UI compared to the original Dynasty Warriors 4. I do prefer the UI of Dynasty Warriors 4, to be fair with you. Like even the fonts that they use and all of that. And I don't know, like it was a darker game, but it made it fun, if that makes sense. I know it sounds really dumb, but it was like stuff felt more pressing. Like if you were playing the Battle of Changban, right? Or if you were doing the Battle of Guandu. I always go back to the Battle of Guandu because a good Muso game, they'll always make sure that the Guandu battle is amazing, and they'll always kind of make sure that the Cherbi battle is amazing. And I remember Dynasty Warriors 4 Cherbi was amazing. Nothing necessarily to write home about. It was still quite fun though, because Dynasty Warriors 4 introduced what ifs, which you didn't really get in previous games. And that was quite fun in terms of the what ifs. Like, you know, what if Pangtong didn't necessarily chain the ships together, right? There was that aspect of it. And there's another thing within Dynasty Warriors 4, which you could do in Dynasty Warriors 3, but it was more noticeable to me as a child because I never really played Dynasty Warriors 3 as a child. It was more noticeable to me with Dynasty Warriors 3 that you could play as the opposite side in free mode, and a lot of the battles were very different compared to Dynasty Warriors 5. Like your Muso mode was incredibly different. How so? Your Muso mode would remain the same no matter which character you pick. Your Muso mode was defined by your faction. So if you're playing as Wu, Shu, Wei, or if you're playing as other and like Lu Bu's kingdom and stuff, your storyline would pretty much be the same. Your battles would pretty much be the same, and it almost allowed you to play as certain characters beyond their point of death. So for example, you could play the whole story as Sun Jian, way past the point of death for Sun Jian. You could do the same with Liu Bei. You can play as Liu Bei until the very end, you know, where they're fighting that final battle with Liu Shan. Liu Bei can still be there. The same with a lot of other characters, and they'll remain there, like Cao Cao. You can literally play as Cao Cao in like Battle of Wuzhang playing, which he would have died by that point. You still play as him, you know, and that was quite interesting, the fact that you could just continue past someone's death and they don't even acknowledge it. So let's say you are playing as Sun Jian, then because you're playing as Sun Jian, it was kind of weird that, I don't know how to explain it, because you're playing as Sun Jian, let's say you're playing as Sun Jian and Cherbi, it would almost be like, oh, your defeat conditions are different. It'll be like, you know, if Sun Jian dies, I'm like, well, no, it should really be like Sun Quan, right? Not even Sun Ce. Like Sun Ce is still there, which was quite interesting. As a kid, I didn't really care. You know, this is like 2003. I was still 8 years old when I was playing this game. So I didn't necessarily really get into the history of Shinsangoku Musou or the history of Romance of Three Kingdoms as such. I mean, this game kind of got me into it a bit more, but I didn't really know the nuances. I didn't really realize that, oh, Cao Cao should have been dead by this point, or Guan Yu should have been dead by this point, or Guan Yu killed this guy, or you know what I mean? So there was a lot of things that I didn't necessarily get historically because of that. It's not necessarily a bad thing. A bad thing in terms of localization, I will say that, but like it was a good entry point for the series. And this is very interesting because when I speak to people, and I mentioned this on the previous episode, when I speak to people, oddly enough, everyone that I meet on the internet, there's, oh my god, yeah, I love Dynasty Warriors. My first one was 5. They'll either say 3 or 5. In the UK, a lot of people say Dynasty Warriors 4 was their favorite. I used to remember going to school. This was at primary school at this point. It was like year 3. And I go up to people and I'd be like, oh man, I love this game. Like, I've been playing Dynasty Warriors. And they're like, no way, you got Dynasty Warriors 4. Like, people were hyped for Dynasty Warriors 4. And I think probably because although it had like a lower age rating, it was still quite gritty as a game because it was quite dark. And, you know, the art style looked amazing back then. The cover art was literally just Lu Bu's weapon and there was like flames, so it's like it seemed like a badass game, you know. And there's a lot of flames in this game as well, and there's a lot of features that this game had that we didn't see in future Dynasty Warriors games, like dueling. And I didn't really remember this until watching Chris's video as I'm watching it now, because I'm looking at the Lu Bu duel. The dueling system in the game was very interesting. If you met a major character like someone like Lu Bu or Guan Yu for the first time, if it's their key battle, like if you're playing Hulao Gate, you'd see him, you'd have to sort of take him out. And with Hulao Gate, it's always a really interesting one because there was a way to go across. I don't think Hulao Gate in Dynasty Warriors 4 let you do that. In other games, you could basically avoid Lu Bu. In Dynasty Warriors 4, you could technically do the same, but you just have, you know, just run in the opposite direction and he'll stop following you. And if you kill Yao Chan, then he will always just be on you. So be prepared for that. But you were always given the opportunity to do a duel. And a lot of the times, it was a lot easier to fight in duels. They were more powerful, but you could do equally as much damage as Lu Bu could do to you. So you're almost put on a level playing field, which is always good. And it's more strategic. You can get around with it if you back yourself into a corner and then hit block and then parry every time Lu Bu does an attack. And you put him off guard and then you just repeat the process, which is kind of a cheat. But like, I remember back in the day, it was just so scary. And this is the thing that we're kind of missing from Dynasty Warriors nowadays. The fear is gone. Like, even I think up until Dynasty Warriors 8 or so, Lu Bu just stopped becoming scary. Unless you're playing on like hard or chaos or nightmare mode. Nightmare I think was introduced in Dynasty Warriors 7, but now it's just like chaos and stuff. I didn't know this as well, that within Dynasty Warriors 4, speaking of difficulty, that there was a difficulty switch. You can't select it as you're playing. You have to go into the options menu, which they've since changed after that point. You go into options and you change it, and you had easy, normal, and hard. It's set to normal by default, but the game does go and become more progressively hard as you play. And there is little, like, I don't know if they're like feathers or like peacock feathers, I think, but like they'll show you the difficulty of a battle. And some battles are more hard than others. Like when you get to the later game, if you're playing Wuzhan Plains, fuck, I call it that again, Wuzhan Plains. If you're playing Wuzhan Plains, then it is going to be a more difficult battle than something like Yellow Turban Rebellion, right? And that was another interesting thing, is that even within the battles, like I mentioned, there was what ifs. So if you play as a particular character in a side battle, so within the main Musou mode, you could select which battles you wanted to fight. And you can go through all of, usually it's like 3 battles per scenario or per chapter within the Musou mode. And you can not do the other 2. You just need to do the main one. But if you do the other 2, then it opens you up for like battles, like other side missions between chapters, like what if battles, or the opportunity to unlock new characters or items, depending on what difficulty and who you pick, etc. I remember back then as well, it was that early PS2 era that you almost didn't know how to unlock things. You have to almost figure it out yourself. You just have to go through all these different combinations. And we do that naturally because we wanted to get the most out of this game. And so we would be like, okay, we completed the Musou mode with, and it used to be me and my sister playing. So when we do it in split screen, always, because that was a lovely thing about that era. Like you could play split screen and it wouldn't take away from your main experience. And in fact, it would enhance it. So we used to play split screen in Wu faction. She would be Sun Ce because Sun Ce was her favorite, and I would be Zhou Yu because Zhou Yu was my favorite. So, and we go through that. And obviously playing as Sun Ce and Zhou Yu naturally kind of got us into the what if battle to unlock the Kiao sisters. So we were able to unlock them because of the character combination and that was really cool. Obviously Dynasty Warriors 5 was slightly different, didn't have that kind of feature like that. Instead more opted for a individual Musou mode per character, which I do prefer, and we'll get into that after the break. But Dynasty Warriors 4 was excellent in that sense because it almost made it irrelevant. You can pick the characters that you want to pick and experience the full game story based on that, and you can level them up. The levels were quite interesting as well because you didn't necessarily get more than one weapon. Dynasty Warriors 5 had this thing where you'd unlock multiple weapons and you'd have to choose, and you know, different weapons have different attributes and all of that kind of stuff. With Dynasty Warriors 4, your weapons leveled up with you, and you could get the master weapons as well, but once again, you'd have to figure out what battle you needed to do. I think you had to do it on hard mode as well, but none of that was clear because early internet days, there was forums. Not everyone had access to the internet, and especially considering a lot of people that were playing the game were, you know, my age, who were like 8 years old, that were playing Dynasty Warriors 4. They probably didn't have access to the internet. I mean, me and my family were very you know, lucky, privileged that we had internet in the early days, but even then it was such a pain in the ass because you couldn't just like Google stuff. Like now you can go on like game FAQs and stuff, and the same forums that you were able to access back then still have the same information now, but it just it loads super quick, and there's a lot of stuff that I'm like, damn, I didn't even unlock this. Like I went back to my original save, half of the items I didn't have, I just focused on leveling up the current items I did, you know, the Phoenix urn thing that gave you more health, the Tiger's Tooth, all of that kind of stuff. But like I didn't have a lot of the different orbs. I don't actually have any of the mounts either in Dynasty Warriors 4, and it's kind of something that I might want to go back and get, you know, that would be really cool, but I don't really have the time to kind of go back and just play them again. That's something that I do want to mention. As great as this game is, if you're playing it on a modern TV, it's very aged. It's aged so much, more so than Dynasty Warriors 2 and 3, and it's weird because Dynasty Warriors 2 and 3 have an excellent charm to them, but Dynasty Warriors 4 just looks really bad on modern televisions. You need to play it on a CRT, which is unfortunate because it is a good game and I really did enjoy it. And kind of odd for me to say this, but it's a game that plays better when you're playing with two people. Makes the game a lot easier. Dynasty Warriors 4 was very hard. There were times where I would get like KO'd multiple times and it would be frustrating, and you're like, how do I defeat this? And I think it was a lot harder than any other Dynasty Warriors game on normal difficulty. So yeah, Dynasty Warriors 4, great game. I think another highlight of Dynasty Warriors 4 was just the fact that the music was fantastic. The heavy metal music that was done by Masa was just iconic, and I think it sort of set the boundary, set the staple for future Dynasty Warriors games. Like Eve, I don't know if you remember Eve. Like there was a battle, I don't know, I can't insert the music here, but there was a battle, and when you hear that Eve music, you'd feel like shit. The game would make you feel like absolute shit. Like your morale was low, people were dying every once in a while, and you're like, shit, what do I do? You were panicking. And then you'd hear this when you succeed in the middle of that music playing, and you're like, yes, I'm turning the tide of the battle. It got you high. It made you feel something. It got that ability to make you feel emotions, and I don't think another Dynasty Warriors game has made me feel like that in recent years, which is insane, but I do really enjoy that. Because of that, I really do enjoy it. We're going to go on an ad break. When we return from the ads, I'm going to talk about Dynasty Warriors 5 and my memories with it. I know I was supposed to talk about 4 Extreme Legends, but we're running over time, and I didn't like 4 Extreme Legends anyway. It just added a few more characters, and it was a bit naff. Let's be real. As well as Empires. Empires, I think, was the first Empires game. It was Koei trying to test something out with their assets that they already had, and it was just a very bare bones game. Speaking to the members of the team, a lot of the team didn't like 5 Empires, but I don't know why. They kind of felt that 6 Empires was better, which, to be fair with you, I still to this day agree that 6 Empires is one of the best Empires games, and I'd argue one of the best Dynasty Warriors games of all time. So when we do our 6 and 7 episode, we'll get into that. Until then, I will go on an ad break and we'll talk about Dynasty Warriors 5. Patreon. Patreon.com/GAL podcasts. Be sure to join our Patreon for access to episodes early. You will get verbal shout outs during podcast mid-rolls like this one, access to our GAL only Discord, as well as podcast pilot previews. There are 3 tiers. There's a £3 a month tier, there's a £5 a month, and you get everything if you get that £10 a month tier. We really would love for you guys to join. It's all right if you don't. It does help out the show. It does help us run the lights on the podcast as well. So we really do appreciate it, even if you can. And even if you can't join our Patreon, make sure that you guys give the show a 5-star rating, as well as sharing it on all your social platforms, sharing it with your friends, sharing it with your aunties, sharing it with your grandma. Why not? Enjoy the podcast, share it around. It helps us sort of get further up in the algorithm and actually be able to run more ads, because we get more opportunities that way. So thank you for supporting the show, guys. Whether or not you want to subscribe on Patreon, we love you all the same. Anyway, back onto the ads. Crunchyroll. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Crunchyroll, longtime sponsor. You can go to getalifepodcast.com/Crunchyroll. Once again, that's getalifepodcast.com/Crunchyroll for a 14-day free trial of Crunchyroll Premium. What does that mean? It means you get ad-free anime with the largest anime selection across any platform. You can watch it on your PlayStation 5, Xbox, Amazon Fire Stick, you name it. That is the entire Crunchyroll library, ad-free. Watch new episodes shortly after they come out in Japan. Stream on 4 devices at a time. Offline viewing for only £60 a year. Amazing. Go to getlifepodcast.com/Crunchyroll. That's getlifepodcast.com/Crunchyroll. Thank you, Crunchyroll, for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. J-List. getlifepodcast.com/J-List. That's getlifepodcast.com/J-List. Use the code GAL for
5%
off anything at J-List, and that includes everything that J-List and J-Box has to offer. So that's gifts, calendars, books and magazines, manga and doujins, anime figures, apparel and cosplay, games and anime, otaku and ecchi goods as well, guys. So go to J-List, that's jlist.com, check what they have to offer and buy it there. They really have a good selection of everything. Currently at the moment, J-List is offering special orders and price matching, which means you can actually request from J-List any specific items that you want, and they can actually go and get it for you from Japan. That's actually how J-List originally started, if I'm not mistaken. We did an episode with Peter Payne, the founder of J-List, so we're actually really happy to have the sponsorship going on like we did before. They also do price matches. There is information on their website. Go to jlist.com and you can find it on their blog. Remember, once again, that's getlifepodcast.com/J-List and use the code GAL for
5%
off on everything on the website. Thank you, J-List, for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Friendly reminder, guys, to join us on our Discord, getlifepodcast.com/Discord. We have all this amazing stuff that's going on at the moment. Dedicated anime channels, dedicated gaming channels, as well as places for you guys to share your content as well. We love to spread that around, so make sure that you join our Discord. That's getlifepodcast.com/Discord, as well as sharing the podcast on whatever platform you're using. If you're using Spotify, make sure that you guys are engaging with our Q&As and our polls and just giving us a 5-star review on any podcast platform that you guys are listening to. There should also be a new feature if you are using Anchor and Spotify in general. You can send us an audio note and we'll listen to it on the podcast, and it's a great way for you guys to get directly engaged with us, which is always awesome, as well as checking us out on X at Gal Podcast, as well as on Instagram, once again at Gal Podcasts, and on TikTok at Gal Podcasts. Okay, I had to start off with that flashback music. Hope you guys enjoyed the ads. Let's talk about Dynasty Warriors 5. So Dynasty Warriors 5 released 2 years after Dynasty Warriors 4. It got a PlayStation 2 release in 2005 February, and then April, and then June for Europe. It got a Xbox release in 2005, later that year in September, and it got an Xbox 360 release, which is very interesting. Once again, this game is not backwards compatible on the Xbox series of consoles, unfortunately, but it is what it is. It also got a Windows release in Japan in 2006 alongside a PAL Xbox 360 release. I'm interested. It is interesting that this game got an Xbox 360 release. I was very surprised by that, but it's very nice nevertheless. It also got an Extreme Legends, which released in November 2005, which was interesting as well. I did get Extreme Legends, and in fact, this was my first Extreme Legends game in the franchise, as well as Empires, which came out in March 2006. Also, my first Empires game. There was an additional, which is Shin Sangoku Musou 4 Special, which I believe is like introduction of the special lines of Shin Sangoku Musou, also released in 2006, which is an Xbox 360 version, which got released in Japan. Was not released outside of Japan and Taiwan. Yeah, which I think is probably a version that included Extreme Legends, but excluded Edit Mode and Destiny Mode. Let's talk about Dynasty Warriors 5. The review scores on Metacritic was lower, oddly enough, 69, nice. It got a 5.2. Oh no, sorry, that's Extreme Legends. Extreme Legends got a 5.2 from IGN. It got a 7.7, a lower score overall, and I don't understand why this game got a lower score. This game was, favorited by a lot of people in the community, and a lot of people in the community will often say, yeah man, this game is a game that got me into Shin Sangoku Musou. Oddly enough, Famitsu, I think, gave the game... Oh, I'm looking at the Empire score. I can't find the score for Famitsu, but the Famitsu scores are always quite high, to be honest with you. With the Shin Sangoku Musou game, it's always in like the mid-30s, which I would consider quite a success for a Famitsu score, which is interesting because Famitsu, I think, takes multiple people to score it, which I think how all games should be reviewed, but that's very, very unlikely unlikely because game developers won't give multiple people within an organization a game to review. That just doesn't happen anymore. But I think the Famitsu way of reviewing games is excellent, because then you can sort of remove any sort of bias by getting multiple people to review it. Anyway, and then get an aggregate of the score. Anyway, I guess that's kind of like what Metacritic ends up doing, but that's besides the point. Dynasty Warriors 5 got a lower score than Dynasty Warriors 4. Why is that? I'm not too sure. Technically, Dynasty Warriors 5 is a more vibrant game. It's a game that even if you are playing on modern HD televisions, will still look good and will still play well. And the music, okay, was still fantastic. Not as good as Dynasty Warriors 4, but it's a different game. And Dynasty Warriors 4 was a more darker take on Shin Sangoku Musou, and it was its own thing. I think what was very interesting about Dynasty Warriors 5 is the Musou mode was reinvented. Musou mode, unlike the other titles, basically focused on individual characters. And you had this sort of thing where, once again, also fully voice acted in multiple languages, but you had this thing where, let's say you're playing as Zhou. I'm going to give Zhou as an example because I love Zhou. But you're playing as Zhou, he would give you like this little monologue, and he would be like, oh, this is me before the battle. And he'll indicate his story about the battle, his thoughts, what he might think will happen. It's almost like he's giving a diary entry, which I thought was very interesting because you got to learn so much more about the characters, which obviously in Musou games in general, even 4 had this, but 5 also had this, where you had the gallery and then you could check the characters' backstories. But within the Musou mode, you actually got to hear from the character's perspective. And yes, it's going to be embellished, but like, you're hearing from the character's perspectives what's going on. How do they feel? Are they worried about this battle? And sometimes they'll talk about the previous battle. Of course, it's all scripted, so even if you did really well in the battle, they're not going to be like, oh, I did a great job on that battle. It's more so focused on the history behind it. You'll see like straight after the battle where Sun Jian dies, if you play Sun Tzu's story mode, he's talking about, you know, now he's in charge and he has to sort of live up to his father's legacy. And you get to see, wow, he's actually an actual human character. He's got worries, he's got goals. And I don't understand why the game got a bad review because of that. Because that sort of, I don't think other Musou games does that. Dynasty Warriors 5 does that really well. And then even then, before that, you'll get that more generic introduction to the battle where, you know, you'll get your commander and they'll, I don't know if you guys remember, it was like, dun, 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 dun. And they'll kind of go through the strategy of the battle. And then after the battle, you'd get like a update from your commander at the end. So in terms of a story, it was well structured and I loved it. And you got to experience different battles across different characters, and it gave you a reason to play different characters. There were characters that I've never, like before, I'd always play like Wu, and it would always be Zhou. And Zhou, to this day, one of my favorite characters. They did kind of fuck him up in Dynasty Warriors 6, but we'll talk about that when we get to the Dynasty Warriors 6 episode. But Zhou, one of my favorite characters, but then you got to play as other people within Wu to get the full story of Wu. And then even then, if you wanted to get the stories of other characters from other factions, because it wasn't like Dynasty Warriors 4 where you went through the exact same battles all the time. This game, if they were not there historically, they wouldn't have been in that battle, right? Like Sima Yi was not in Battle of Trebi, for example. So he wasn't there. I'm trying to remember. You know, Liu Bei wasn't in the battle of. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember off the top of my head. But if the characters weren't there historically, they won't be there. You kind of got to see relationships between characters. One very interesting character was Guan Ping, was just introduced in that game. Same with Jing Sai, who is Guan Yu's son and Zhang Fei's daughter, respectively. They kind of had this sort of romance arc going on, which is very interesting because historically, I think Jing Sai married Liu Shan. I can't remember off the top of my head, but Liu Shan was still an NPC at this point, so it was kind of Guan Ping's time to riz, and he did quite well. But anyway, so there was that kind of aspect in the game. You got to see their relationship between characters, and when characters die, it was very emotional. Like that, you know, seeing someone like Dian Wei die, that was like the first time I got to see Dian Wei die. I was like, no, Dian Wei! And then having to play the other battles afterwards, knowing that Dian Wei is not there, and then having characters reference Dian Wei was very interesting. And the only other game that I see that level of attention to detail was Dynasty Warriors 7 in terms of character development and story, which is interesting because you might be wondering, well, how can you really embellish on a story? How can you develop a story and develop characters in which basically the story is already pre-written? right? It's based off a book. How can you develop those characters even more? Yes, Koei did have to take some sort of creative liberties in terms of the storyline, like I mentioned, that whole Guanping and Jingsai scenarios, but they did a really good job of it, and they made it very believable. And that was the game that made me think, oh, you know what? I'm going to read Sangguo Yanyi. I'm going to read Romance of the Three Kingdoms. And it got me to fall in love with that story. Interestingly enough, there was other modes that I really did enjoy, like the Empires mode, which was in a separate game, because it introduced us to empires, at least in terms of my family. And it was just, there's so many hours that I'd spend playing Empires because it was my own journey. I can create my own character, which in all fairness, you can create your own character in Extreme Legends as well. You weren't able to transfer your character from Extreme Legends to Empires, which I think was a bit shit, but hey ho, I'm not going to complain because there was no mixed joy feature. This also did have mixed joy. I almost didn't like using mixed joy back then, and I still don't use mixed joy now. I kind of treated them as separate games, and I think probably because Dynasty Warriors was my favorite game and I wanted to get the most out of it. I want to unlock everything. I want to play the story. And I think with the Extreme Legends games, yes, you are meant to mix joy them and play it as a mixed joy, as almost like a DLC, but additional modes in Extreme Legends just made it really fun. You had your edit mode. I think you had a Destiny mode, which is basically you take your edit character and play through a Muso mode yourself, and you also had these little challenges that went through. You got to level up your character through that mode. I'm trying to think what else you had. It was basically you carving out your place in history. You had all these other elements like bodyguards, right? And depending on how well you did in battle or certain battle conditions were met, similar to like unlocking orbs and like other items and stuff like that, you basically could do the same with bodyguard. And you didn't have like a set of 12 bodyguards like in Dynasty Warriors 4 where you had to like level them up and all that kind of stuff. You could still level them up, but it's like one individual bodyguard. And I think you had different types. There was a healing type bodyguard that uses the fan. You had a crossbow and bow type bodyguard. You had a pike and spear bodyguard. And then you had a sword bodyguard. One I think that uses staff as well. But like they were basic character archetypes that were being used by NPCs. They were effectively NPCs, but they could help you out really. I know for a fact that if I was going into a very difficult battle, for example, especially if I was playing on Chaos, I'd make sure that I get my highest level bodyguard that actually was able to heal me. That made it so much more interesting. It made the game more strategic, because if you're playing split screen like I was doing, you know, I would be with my sister and I'd be like, look, you take your strong bodyguard, I'll take my healing bodyguard, and then we'll play on Chaos. And that's something that Dynasty Warriors 5 introduced. They introduced a harder mode called the Chaos mode. And that was a mode that still exists to this day. Some games might refer to it as Nightmare. Some of them might still refer to them as Chaos. But with Chaos mode, like 2 arrows could kill you. 2 or 3 arrows could kill you. And you had to think about the game more strategically. You had to make sure your levels were sufficient enough. We did such a crazy thing back then. If we wanted to level up characters, because you get more XP, you take them in as level 1 in a Chaos mode. And sometimes we reset the characters or we start a new save and just go Chaos. It was fun. Like I remember we did that with Zhou Tai. Like I didn't really like playing as Zhou Tai in the beginning, and then we were like, you know what? I'm just gonna play as Zhou Tai, but I'm gonna do him as level 1 on Chaos. And like we made our own challenges in those games, and that's what was really fun about it. Of course, there was a challenge mode in Dynasty Warriors 5 as well. Not many people played it. I think the challenge modes were good to a certain degree, but there was no online functionality at that time. I believe if you're playing on 360, there might have been, at least with leaderboards, but no online co-op or whatever. So it was just very interesting that those modes existed. It was just additional modes for the sake of it. And obviously in the future games, Koei has kind of implemented the challenge mode as part of DLC, which is unfortunate. I think challenge mode should always just be a base game mode. Destiny mode was a good one, the edit mode as well. I think Dynasty Warriors 5 and 5 Empires was just a fantastic game. The color palette was good. There was a lot of gray stages. The maps were a lot smaller compared to Dynasty Warriors 4, but it means you could traverse the maps quite easily. It was easier to get certain items compared to Dynasty Warriors 4. The challenge wasn't as high. There was some challenging parts, of course, like defeating Lu Bu, still always a challenge even in this game. Also introduced bases, so you'd have different bases that have different functions. And this was almost like a feature that was taken from Empires that was included in the main game, which was very unique to me because at the point we never had Dynasty Warriors 4 Empires, so we didn't experience bases in that kind of game. But you had attack bases, which I thought was interesting because the NPCs used Liu Shun's weapons, you know, the 2 swords. You had attack bases that would sort of fire mortars at the enemies and would obviously raise your morale, and you'd get like attack items and stuff, which was really cool. So you had attack bases, you had defense bases, you had supply bases, and I think you had free bases as well. So free bases was basically one of the assigned bases that would basically, it was a normal base. It could be a supply base, could be attack base, but the first person, whether it's an enemy or whether it's an ally that enters that base, basically will take ownership of it. Unlike Empires games, if you take over an enemy's base, it just cut off their base, right? It wouldn't really do much. Like, you couldn't take over the base yourself, which is unfortunate. But it made the game very strategic because you needed to take down bases to, in most cases, to reveal the enemy commanders. And there was always a line of sight to the main camp, and you can cut it off. And depending on where the base was situated, because you normally have like a supply base and then around it would be a defense base and an attack base. And it was almost like triangled inside other bases. And what do I mean by that? It's like you have to take out the other bases before taking out that supply base. You could still take out that supply base, but it was just harder to do that because they were getting defense boosts and they were getting attack boosts from the other bases around them. So the base mechanic was really cool. It was something that we kind of stopped seeing from that point, which was, you know, I didn't mind it. The bases was a nice feature. I think we kind of got to see that again in Dynasty Warriors 9, but it was quite primitive. It was kind of using the sort of Empires version of that. But even Empires also did have these bases as well. So they used that to their advantage. And the Empires games were really fun in terms of like using policies, and it kind of had the more political aspect of Dynasty Warriors 5. Another interesting thing that I forgot to mention about Dynasty Warriors 5 is that you had larger movesets, as well as the introduction of Muso Rage. So Muso Rage was basically enhanced attack, enhanced defense. You had a longer Muso bar in some cases, and you do your Way of the Muso with it. And it was just amazing. Like, attack speed was boosted as well. Attack range was boosted. It was just really, really fun. And you wouldn't get it all the time, which I thought was interesting, because obviously you can't get Muso Rage all the time, but you'd also have items that would extend Muso Rage and all that. And it was really cool. And you would really save those Muso Rages up for difficult battles, like if you're fighting Lubu or anything like that. Yeah, Dynasty Warriors 5, just a really, really good game, one that I really do love. And I think as they stand, Dynasty Warriors 5 was a much better game than Dynasty Warriors 4, and I can see why a lot of people got into the fandom, became part of the TK family because of Dynasty Warriors 5, because it was so accessible. It was just easier to play, it was more accessible, it was more forgiving, and because of all the different spin-offs, where we're talking about Orochi 1, Orochi 2, and games that use the same engine to this day. You know, they were using that Dynasty Warriors 5 engine up until Orochi 3, where you kind of got character models coming in from Dynasty Warriors 7. But like, it was interesting because they kind of skipped out, even like Orochi 2 and stuff like that, they kind of skipped out the Dynasty Warriors 6 models, which was an interesting choice. But we kind of got a lot of spin-offs using the same engine and the same movesets. So I can understand, because of familiarity, that this game is so beloved, which is interesting because it just got bad scores. I don't know why it got bad scores in comparison, but you know, it was a good game. It was a good game. Dynasty Warriors 5. Would I say it's my favorite Dynasty Warriors game? I think a lot of people that if you speak to them, I know even the team agrees, like they'll say Dynasty Warriors 2 and 5 were their favorite games. And yeah, Dynasty Warriors 5 is so underrated. It's such a good game. The UI is fantastic. Even to this day, like, it looks so cool. You know, it's a very different aspect of game compared to Dynasty Warriors 4. Not to say that Dynasty Warriors 4 is not enjoyable, and to be fair with you, I would have considered Dynasty Warriors 4 to be one of my favorite games of all time. But I think I've thoroughly exhausted that game, even though there's so much for me to get. And with Dynasty Warriors 5, there was just so much more like that was built off that game, and I would say it's a more iconic game because of it. Like the Samurai Warriors games were kind of built off that engine as well. I think probably not Samurai Warriors 1, because Samurai Warriors 1 and Extreme Legends were coming around the time of like Dynasty Warriors 4. But regardless, like the stuff that the game introduced, a lot of features that remain to this day, like Muso Rage and like expanded movesets and individual Muso modes for characters and side things like Destiny mode, and the fact that Empires hasn't really changed since Dynasty Warriors 5 sort of solidified it. Even Extreme Legends solidified it for Koei, you know, and they kind of built off of that. And I can understand why Dynasty Warriors 5 is just literally so many people's favorite game. What I liked about it is just it had varied stages as well. It wasn't always dark and dingy. You had some desert stages, you had some snowy stages, some mountainous ranges, and they were different depending on who you play as. Because I'm sorry, in Dynasty Warriors 4, every character, every faction had a Nanman mission. Why? Why was Wu in Nanman? They shouldn't have been there. They slightly adapted the story to fit, but it just felt out of place. But here you only have Shu as a Nanman thing, right? Which just makes sense. It just makes sense. So yeah, the game is just very sophisticated as a Musou game, and I think if you do want to get involved in Shin Sangoku Musou, 5 is a good starting point. I used to say, oh, play Dynasty Warriors 2, but Dynasty Warriors 2 is quite old at this point. It's not as modern. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to people unless they're very heavily involved in hack and slash or have played more modern Shin Sangoku Musou games. But I think if you want to get into the sweet spot of Dynasty Warriors, play Dynasty Warriors 5 and its subsequent spin-off games, and then sort of start from there and then work your way back. It's the same sort of thing that I say with Persona. I say, if you guys want to get involved in Persona, play Persona 4, very friendly, and then you can go back and play previous Persona games. It's the same with Dynasty Warriors. Play Dynasty Warriors 5, play Shin Sangoku Musou 4 if you're in Japan, and then work your way back. You will miss out on some characters because they weren't available in 3 and 2, 5 and 4. You'll get a better understanding of the story. You get a better understanding of the characters and better understanding of the mechanics for future games, because a lot of mechanics remain the same with 5 and then 6, 7, 8, etc. So that was this episode. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I love talking about Dynasty Warriors, and I love talking about this series as a whole, and I do want to see it succeed. And we're kind of getting close to the 30th anniversary of Shin Sangoku Musou, I'm pretty sure. So I'm hoping Koei does something, whether that is I might be very optimistic in saying this, a HD collection, we might not see that, or a new game. I would like to see Dynasty Warriors 10, and I think it is coming. I know Dynasty Warriors 10 is coming. Koei, you can't fool me. I know Dynasty Warriors 10 is coming. You're a very predictable company, which isn't a bad thing, but yeah, I expect the Dynasty Warriors 10 to be a thing by 30th anniversary announcement for Shin Sangoku Musou or Dynasty Warriors. Anyway, that's been this episode. Make sure that you give us a 5-star review on whatever platform that you're listening to, whether that is iTunes, aka Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, YouTube. We're now on YouTube, guys, because Google Play is ending its podcast service and it's being replaced with YouTube Podcasts. So unfortunately, Stitcher doesn't exist anymore. So you can watch us on all the great, amazing podcast services, including YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, as well as Amazon Podcasts. So check us out everywhere. Enjoy the show. Give us a good review as well, 5-star review. It helps us. If you're listening on YouTube, hit that like button. No, but seriously, be sure to support our sponsors as well. The next episode, we are hoping it to be 6 and 7. I have no real experience with 6, so I'm gonna have to play 6 a lot more. My main experience with 6 is through Empires, so I can give you my thoughts on 6 Empires, but I really want to give my thoughts on 6. So what I'm going to do instead is that we're going to put another episode in between. It won't be Dynasty Warriors related. It might be Sengoku Basara or Samurai Warriors or another game that I played, just to give me some time to actually properly play Dynasty Warriors 6 and Strike Force, because we're going to have to talk about Strike Force in this episode as well. So I need some more time because, like I said, I haven't played the other games, but you will still get another GALP episode next week. So hell yeah. I haven't decided what it's going to be. It might be Super Mario RPG. It might be Final Fantasy related, but yeah, a lot of other people are wondering what we are going to do for the next month of episodes. Like I mentioned, we're going to be focusing January/Feb on Yakuza, so the Like a Dragon series, as well as Final Fantasy 7 in a sort of anticipation for remake and rebirth, as they call it, as well as other titles. But be sure there will be other episodes in. We do want to do a series similar to this, focusing on Samurai Warriors. I've never played Samurai Warriors before Samurai Warriors 4, so it will be interesting for me to play Samurai Warriors 1, 2, and 3. I will get 3, not on the Wii. I will import 3. I'll import 3, and I believe it's called Z as well. And then I'll do the same with Orochi. We'll do a similar series with Orochi. We'll do similar series on Sengoku Basara, as well as little smaller episodes on titles like One Chambara, Criminal Girls. Like I mentioned, I love Criminal Girls, so I do want to dedicate another episode to Criminal Girls, as well as other titles. Samurai Maiden. I'm trying to think. There's so many other games, especially hack and slash games. And you might be wondering, well, Bish, why are we doing hack and slash games? I just love hack and slash games, guys. So hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Tell me what you want to see as well, or these little mini series on GALP that are supposed to last a month. So let me know, because I've noticed in terms of analytics, like a lot of our popular episodes focus on games that we haven't really covered as much nowadays. So like Animal Crossing is very popular for us, Story of Seasons as well, which I do love Story of Seasons. So if you want to see more Story of Seasons content, then let me know and we'll get that done as well. Anyway, bye.